What is up, guys? I got my buddy Zach Tomanovich coming on tonight, another physical therapist, strength coach, all around just good dude, knowledgeable guy, learning. Don't be alarmed by the glasses. I know, different look, but there's my guy Z. Saying don't be alarmed by the glasses. I know it's a different look. Getting a Lasik evaluation, so if any of you guys have advice for me on that or words of encouragement, let me know. Dr. Z.
How's it going?
Thanks for coming on, man.
Absolutely. Still working on this setup here. It's a little close for me.
No, I like it. You should be the center of attention. I'm trying to phase myself out of it a little bit.
No.
I was just saying everyone's going to see the new look glasses, but I have a Lasik evaluation coming up, so I'm out of contacts for.
Yeah.
So
How about that?
I need all the encouragement I can get for it if I'm going to follow through on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me know how that goes.
Yeah, we'll do.
Yeah, I was thinking about getting it myself too.
I know. I heard. I don't want to get on too far of a tangent because I could probably talk quite a bit about it. But,
sure.
I heard this age is the time to do it, just because the more your eyes age, and it's just the amount of time it'll last is less and less.
Sure.
I'll be the test dummy for us though. If it goes, wrong, or if I go blind, then I'll steer you away from it.
Absolutely.
So, who we got in here? Legacy. Is that
Bryce?
One of your guys?
Bryce from Elmhurst. He's doing big things with his own training company. He's a strength and conditioning coach himself.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I like representing the Elmhurst in here.
Absolutely.
Chi-town trainer. We got the Chicago crew rolling in. So
that's right.
Let's dive in. Just kind of want to start hearing your background, not even on the professional side of things, but I know we just get to geek out on training quite a bit off camera. So just want to hear a little bit about your training background and how that's evolved over the years. What's up, Vanch?
Well, I think training started with, how you started as well. A lot of us started just training in high school for high school football. After that, I kind of needed something to do, and I fell in love with training. So just doing it as a hobby, and then realizing that I can do it as an exercise science major. I can get into it as a career. So over time, I think I started with just training for football. And then after that, transitioning into more of like a bodybuilding style, bro split, if you will, just working on chest on Monday, legs, back, all that stuff. And then after going into training myself, just personal training on the side, and even into physical therapy school, kind of going the more functional route, if you will. So less body part splits and more full body training movements, as opposed to just sitting there doing bicep curls to get big arms.
Which is important, but
it is important. Absolutely. That's right.
So, and I know that's been a cool evolution in seeing, talking to you, but what role did injuries play a specific role in that for you, or is that
100%. So going into college, I thought I was going to be an accounting major. I was doing business classes, and then injuries through football. So tore my ACL, tore my Achilles, broke my fibula, tore ligaments in my ankle. So I got introduced to PT quite a bit. I think at the time when I tore my ACL, I just wanted to get back into playing football again. And then transitioning into, tearing the Achilles, tearing the fibula, or breaking the fibula, I was like, okay, this PT stuff's pretty cool. So it introduced me to the physical therapy world. And, after the second and third go around to PT, I'd really decided that that's what I wanted to do as a career. And I feel like that's where a lot of athletes are too in the profession, maybe even strength and conditioning, personal training, physical therapy. A lot of them are ex-athletes who have gotten injured, and now they're have pursued that as a career path.
So is that flip from bodybuilding to functional training, or did it still take you a little bit after?
It still took me a little bit. I fell in love with the whole bodybuilding stuff. It took me a little bit. I was definitely stubborn to begin with. But I think incorporating everything has been great, not just falling in love with one style, and everything can be combined.
Absolutely. And I want to hear from you, because you do. I mean, you're not just in the PT realm. You're doing some some training stuff as well through, are you training more, is that more athletic population or?
Anyone, weight loss, people that are new to training, people that want to do sports performance. I've done it all at this point. Let's say right now. What's that? Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was gonna say, I want to hear kind of your, the functional training word gets thrown around a lot. That's a pretty big buzzword in that transition you had from bodybuilding into functional training. And what does that look like for you and for the people you're training? Break that down a little more.
Sure. So I think a lot of things that I try to focus on are more, one, body awareness to begin with. Can you even coordinate moving two dumbbells in your hand when you're doing a bench press on a bench, right? In terms of functional training, I like doing a lot of weighted carries, a lot of kettlebell work, kind of getting away from just standing there doing a bicep curl. I think functional training does get thrown around a lot, and it's not just doing squats under a barbell. I think functional training for me is, what's the purpose of the movement? What goal are you trying to achieve? What goal do your clients or patients have? So functional in the sense of, if they have a shoulder problem or shoulder pain, or their scapula isn't moving the way it should be, what types of exercises can we do to help facilitate some of this and help it move a little bit better? Even with, if you look at weighted carries, right? Like, just hold a kettlebell in one hand. What's that going to challenge? Both grip strength, core stability, anti-rotation. Go walk with it, right? If you go on a Costco run or something, you got to carry your groceries, and you're buying half the store when you go. So
yeah. And
trying to think of things that will transition into everyday life, really.
Sure. And if you're like any man out there, you can't take 2 trips from the car to get the groceries inside.
Right.
So
you got to
be strong enough to carry it in. I like what you said about the squat not necessarily being a functional exercise. I think a lot of people associate compound movements with functional, and that's not always the case.
Absolutely. I mean, you have your sit to stands and stuff, and you can absolutely train sitting down, standing up from a couch and stuff. But just because it's a squat doesn't necessarily make it, this quote unquote functional buzzword that we like to throw around. For me, it's the intention behind the movement, and then it's the goals of your clients or patients or whoever you're working with.
Do you think everyone should be able to barbell back squat?
It's a good question. I don't. What are things that you have to do throughout your day? How does that match your lifestyle? If someone wants to come to me and learn how to barbell back squat, that's great. But if that's not their goal, then we're not going to make it the goal.
I'm with you on that, because I think that was something I struggled with for a long time, especially coming out of school. For me, it was like, well, everyone has to be able to squat. That was, everyone has to be able to perform this, perfect back squat, because we should be able to. But when I step back and think about, does everyone really need to? And like you said, if the goal is, sport, there's likely a need for it in, if their goal is, powerlifting, or if their goal is actually to learn the back squat, yes. But I found a lot of people I was forcing into the back squat could get the same benefits from a goblet squat, could get the same benefits from a sandbag squat, can get the same benefits from lunging if mobility limitations didn't allow it. And that doesn't mean ignore getting back to that, but I found it was my own stubbornness of, everyone has to back squat because I feel like everyone should have to. But it sounds like you ran into some of that too. Your realization probably a lot earlier than mine.
Well, I think the realization was with myself after tearing the ligaments in my ankle. I was like, I still have a screw in my ankle. My ankle can only dorsiflex so far, so back squatting for me is going to be pretty limited. And then, lacking that, I'm going to get some compensations at the lower back, and my lower back ends up hurting. I'm like, why am I squatting 225? I can go front squat a dumbbell, switch it up, do 4 sets of 12 to 15, and achieve the same training effect that you can with a barbell. There's definitely better and more efficient ways to go about doing it than just saying you're going to back squat and that's it, or you're going to barbell bench press and that's it. I think it's definitely very individualized.
Absolutely. My guy Clapper on here. Do you feel squatting variations in general are great for overall knee and hip mobility?
I mean, I think you can speak to this as well, but I think absolutely. It's one thing to just train or stretch or perform these, banded mobility exercises, but you have to follow that up with some type of active movement so your nervous system can now control that movement. So even look at, you can see a lot of Instagram videos that use kettlebells. So like, people are in a squat and placing a kettlebell on their leg and going through like these ankle mobility, shifting from side to side. All these things work on mobility 100%.
Yeah, I agree. I think squatting and I like variations too, because there's things that, especially like I mentioned, a goblet squat is something that is very favorable for people in terms of mobility, just with where the weight sits. It allows people to sit into a deeper stretch. If you're targeting the hips, it can counterbalance some limited ankle mobility and is a good way to retrain the movement and actually use it instead of going heavier. For some people, might have to start heavier. For people that have a lot of mobility limitations, start a little heavier with them to give them more counterbalance, and actually trying to decrease the weight for that can end up being more challenging for them. But there's some varying the stance will target different areas, and like a narrower stance typically will get the ankles a little more and a little more knee flexion. Mm-hmm. Wider stance, more of a hinging pattern, will get hips a little more. So, but like you said, it has to be, any mobility work has to be followed up with something that challenges that, or else we're not hitting save on the document.
Right. Don't just do some type of passive treatment that would increase flexibility or increase mobility in the short term. You want to make long-term benefits from that. So go ahead, follow that up with some type of loading.
Yeah, absolutely. And Clapp says, agreed. Our culture in the States limits our natural mobility, where Asia and Eastern cultures use a movement pattern regularly. Yeah, and we don't see them struggling with the same mobility issues that we see here.
Absolutely.
Now, what are your thoughts? You mentioned some mobility band stuff. Is that something you incorporate into a warm up, or what are your thoughts on how a properly structured warm up should be?
I do and I don't, and I that's based on because I don't own mobility bands and myself, so I use what is at the gym. So if I find them out at the gym, I like to warm my ankles up, I like to warm my hips up, and that's regardless of if I'm doing an upper or lower body day. I just think for me, those are things that I find that chronically get tight and stiff. So if I were to just jump into any type of squat, I like to make sure that my hips are warmed up, both from a mobility standpoint. So, Kelly Starrett offers a lot of mobility drills using the resistance bands. I also like to take like TheraBands, so doing clams, lateral band walks, anything to kind of activate and facilitate the muscles that are the goal of the day. So if I want to do a squat, want to work on the hips, want to work on the quads, I'm going to go ahead, do just some light resistance training beforehand, and then get into the movement. And I find that I feel a lot better doing that. But in terms of your question, so for a warm-up too, I like to do walking on the treadmill or 5 to 10 minutes on the rower, something that's going to increase my heart rate as well. I don't like to go into something just cold and without actually practicing the movements or warming up the muscles that I'm using first.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, I like some of those like prehab type exercises, the clams and everything, but big, and you mentioned this way at the beginning, but big focus on form with those too. If there's a difference between
absolutely
throwing a band around and sort of shuffling along versus, really being aware of how you're moving, and that can change the whole point of the exercise.
Absolutely. Sorry, I got to plug my phone in here.
It's all good. We don't want you dying on us.
That's right.
No problem changing the subject. He said not to change the subject. Don't worry about it. But what's your guys' views on barefoot or minimalist shoe training?
I've never done it, so I don't know too much about it.
Well, you're a Nike guy, ride or die, right?
Unfortunately, yeah. I've tried to look into the New Balance, but I still like the way Nikes look, so I haven't switched over yet.
Yeah, so I can speak to that a little bit from personal experience. I think it's a great tool for those that can do it. I think a lot of a lot of issues would clear up just from doing that. A lot of people's back issues and ankle issues and knee issues from getting comfortable with that now have to properly work into that. I started when I got into some kettlebell training, they require you to train barefoot. So by not necessarily by my choice, but I got a little more into that, and it was crazy how much better my things like ankle mobility got, and just how general like connectedness of the lower body. I do think there's a lot of considerations to that. People that are really limited in ankle mobility, jumping right into that is going to pose some problems. A good starting point for that is doing it, just work into a warm up, doing a little bit of your mobility work, barefoot, walking around in general, a little more throughout the day, barefoot are all good recommendations for someone looking to ease into that. I think high heels for barefoot.
Before barefoot.
Yeah. If your ankle mobility is like mine, for certain things, you need high heels if you're squatting or something like that. Clap, did you have any? Yeah, Clap, did you have any other any thoughts on that? He can chime in here when he goes. Do you what kind of mobility limitations do you see most in the athletes, people you're working with, more in the general population sense?
A lot of ankles, a lot of hip, a lot of thoracic spine. These are things that we try to really hammer home in fixing, and I think that's a result of just a lot of our people sitting all day, to be honest with you. Just sit at a computer, stuck in kind of that thoracic flexion, hunched over, or those are the big three that we usually see.
And we'll get back to maybe some of those specific ones in a sec, but what do you think about those that have more either chronic in nature mobility limitations, or like you have a screw that's going to limit ankle mobility to some degree? And I've worked on my ankle mobility for, in every way I know imaginable. And I think there are just some joint limitations that keep me from getting into good, say, overhead squat position. But do you have ways you work around people that have more of those chronic mobility limitations?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that you can look at is even into that weightlifting shoe where you do have that elevated heel. So that might be something that's easy for you to use. The other things I would say, if there is a chronic mobility issue, really try to tease out what the issue is, right? So is it at the joint level? Is it flexibility? Is it just a lack of strength somewhere up the chain? And if you really can't correct it, then adjust the movement. So if maybe the barbell overhead squat just isn't going to be safe for you, just based on the fact that your ankle doesn't move very well. There's other ways to train that. I think the other thing in terms of chronic, I don't know, actually. How do you address it, since this is something, because I remember you were stretching ankles out all the time. So how have you used it?
Oh man, I've tried just about everything I can possibly know. I've seen PTs and chiros for it, and done banded stuff, and 10 to 20 minutes of deep squatting a day, and all these things. And I definitely make some headway during times when I'm more consistent with that, but still not to the degree of being able to overhead squat in a really good position. And some of it's probably old ankle sprains, and I'm super bow-legged, so I think there's like some joint considerations there. But I think working into some of those movements are still beneficial. I find when I train say something like the overhead squat in a controlled position, you can use things like band assistance or something to help them still train that pattern with benefit without necessarily needing to go heavy in that movement. So for something, we look at an example like ankle mobility limitations, throw a band around their hips to allow them to just feel comfortable, feel confident to sit deeper into that motion, get the mobility benefits from that, but don't need to necessarily be loading that movement up heavy. We can get that from back squatting and lunging, and especially for people with keeping on the ankle mobility route, things like lunging are super favorable. Like you said, modifying the movement, things like lunges can work around some of those things. And anyone that's done lunges know that you can get just as much benefit from a squatting movement if done correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even speaking to lunges, if you don't, not even elevating your heel with a shoe, but just elevating your foot on a couple of plates, you can work yourself deeper into that lunge.
Yeah. And we've had this conversation before too, but even how the lunge is performed and letting the knee travel forward versus keeping the knee upright can be modifications, but also things that can, challenge and improve on those things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. But so how do you modify say someone has low back pain with a back squat due to ankle mobility limitations? How are you modifying around that? Because I know for us, we probably, we know what we're talking about, but for people listening that aren't so sure of what those modifications look like.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple different ways. Like one, maybe even just modify the depth. So maybe you're just going too low, and you have lack of control. I'm a big believer in just kind of, starting body weight with everything. So build that foundation. Don't even touch a weight. I don't even care if it's a pound. Just make sure that you can do a body squat to either parallel or above parallel and without pain. Now, if you're still doing it, then you can even go into like a quadruped position, do some, quadruped rock backs. If you think about it, so if you're on your hands and knees, pushing your butt back towards the heels, what are you doing? You're just squatting. You're just now on your hands and knees. So it's the same movement, but you're teaching the body kind of how to go through that movement, okay, without pain. And the fact that you're not standing up. So gravity plays a different role on you. Your hips and your ankles are all loaded a little bit differently. So really starting from the ground up, if you will. So even if someone has back pain, is it a mobility issue? It is a core stability issue. So tease out the problem and then do some corrective exercises to correct some of those things that you've seen, and then have them return to the squat. And again, I wouldn't even have them squat in full depth. Go to what's comfortable, and then progressively over time increase the depth. And then once they can do a good body weight squat to good depth, then start adding, weight, having them hold that front squat position. And then, if you're at a gym that has a barbell, do barbells or kettlebells or whatever's available to you and how you want to load that.
Yeah, definitely. I like what you said too about teasing out the reason why too often we assume or people, skip that step of, and that's a hard thing to assess on yourself too. We've given form feedback to each other, because it's just a hard thing to see when you're watching on your own. And that's where getting to a good assessment of figuring out, why is this even an issue? It could be something as simple as, oh, you're putting the bar super high on your neck when it should be a little lower on your back if you're doing a low bar back squat. And sometimes there's more simple things, but sometimes it's hard to feel where there's mobility or especially stability limitations.
Absolutely. I mean, and the other thing too is if you're really assessing the squat, watch someone do a single leg squat. You'll find out a lot. I think a lot gets hidden when you're on two legs. Is there more rotation, or does their knee cave in, or do they lose their balance even just standing single leg? I think that can tell you a lot, and you can work on that stuff and then work on that and then watch what happens when they do just a double leg body squat.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, you'd be surprised. You wouldn't be surprised, but some people listening might be surprised how many people are squatting, deadlift, like picking up, moving around some what people would consider decent amounts of load, but can barely stabilize themselves on one leg without seeing a bunch of compensation and sway in the side to side plane.
Yeah, I'll be one of them. But I still, I ego lift. I lift too heavy, but, I definitely have a hard time even performing a single leg squat on my left leg. Mm-hmm. And that's the one with the, the screws in the ankle.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm talking even like some people just standing on one leg, not even adding the squat in. Some people, like,
sure, absolutely,
is, an issue even. And it's not that they shouldn't be doing some of the heavy movements, but it's something they should be simultaneously addressing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or placing less priority on it.
Sure.
I'm a big fan of, you stick to the basics first, build your foundation first, just be patient with it. Training in itself is a marathon. It's not a sprint. I know we all have goals and we want to achieve those goals relatively quickly, but again, let's do it safely and build that foundation up right, so then you can be confident with your movement going forward and confident with adding weight or load or, progressing the movement in any way you can.
Sure. I want to go back to something you said maybe a few minutes ago, because this is something I have an internal struggle with, an answer that I might give myself differently than with the whole ego thing you're talking about for someone else. But if someone can't perform a good body weight squat, like you said, do you let them load up or load up heavy? Because what happens when their loaded squat looks better than their body weight squat? Asking for a friend.
That's a tough question. I personally wouldn't, just kind of based on things that I believe in. So I don't know how to answer that question. Yeah, that's a great question. I wouldn't. I would make sure the body weight squat looks pretty good first, and before progressing them into like a loaded barbell.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors at play, but like I said, there's an ego thing at play to some degree. But I don't put myself in a different category, but I also have worked enough on some of the other things that I feel confident doing it. But like I said, I would probably give a different answer if someone else was asking. But that doesn't mean it's right.
That's fair. I think, I don't know, practice what you preach, I guess.
Uh-huh.
Or, for you, do as I say, not as I do type deal over there. I don't know.
Yeah, but I've kind of changed on that, though, because if someone, I think of that load as being similar to what we talked about with, say, like a kettlebell goblet squat, where it's giving enough counterbalance to put someone in a really good position, and they're not compensating through the back if knees and hips and everything's in a good position, I don't see a problem with it.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense to me in the sense of providing a counterbalance. I was more thinking along the lines of if their squat doesn't look good body weight and then you toss them under a barbell. I think counterbalance to me makes sense, and I agree.
At least that's what I tell myself.
Yeah,
but
sure.
like for me, it's for me it's a depth issue. Body weight, I have a harder time fighting just getting myself into there if I don't have a counterbalance. But even at 135, I can get into a pretty solid position just from having that little feedback and a little bit of shift in where the weight is.
Well, I guess it is interesting that you bring this up, because I kind of do it too without me realizing it. Is even in my warm up, I'll do some squats with a counterbalance with the kettlebell. I kind of tend to, in my back squat, I even tend to kind of dump into that posterior tilt, so you get a little flexion at the lumbar spine. So really, I try not to load up until I realize that I'm not doing that, and things that help with me and my control are doing those counterbalance squats and then adjusting the depth. Because I find if I start to go too low, I start to throw 225 or more weight on there, my back's rounding, my back hurts, and I'm like, okay, well, that isn't something I should be doing.
So that'll take us into a good segue. You mentioned posterior tilt. What people commonly know is the butt wink at the bottom position of the squat. What are your thoughts on that? Okay, never okay, sometimes okay?
Well, I've read a lot about it because I've tried a lot to fix it in myself, and I haven't found a consistent way to fix it. The only way that I've found to fix it is adjusting my depth and not going as low. I've tried core stability, I've tried hamstring, I've tried mobility at the ankles, and I still kind of fall into that posterior tilt. I have read a lot on it saying it's normal, and I can agree to that. I mean, I think some is normal, but I think again, I don't know how often people are throwing 500 pounds on their back and going all the way down into that lumbar flexion. I'd have to look at the research and say, okay, here's what's going on. I mean, just typically loaded in that position isn't ideal. But again, you have exercises like the Jefferson curl, which I would never do, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, going off of one thing you said, that there's a lot of variance within that too, of people, at what depth is it happening? Mobility is going to play a role in that, but some degree of that is more than we think. I don't want to quote the exact numbers on how much actual lumbar flexion is occurring, but a lot more than
Sure.
people think. I need to do reverse sit-ups with a 150-pound dumbbell, and it will go away. All right, I'll do it. Yeah, but what's your, what do you have against Jefferson curls?
I've never tried them, so I don't know. It looks. I think initially for me, I'm always a skeptic, so I'm always like, I don't know. It doesn't look safe. I don't know. I feel like I don't know. I don't know if it's an exercise I'll ever try, to be honest with you.
I'm curious on thought. Just you think it'd be bad for your back?
I do think so. I do. Just for me personally, just based on even getting some back pain after squatting or getting some back pain with deadlifting, like I would just be concerned if certain muscles aren't activating in the way that they should be, or I'm not stabilizing properly or performing the movement properly. Like for me, I would even want like you or another trained professional to physically look at me before even doing that movement. But in terms of my goals, I just don't even see a purpose of doing that movement.
I would challenge some of that in my own
Sure.
thought. I just think that, some of those things, especially with, if you can't, and I'm not saying load up I'm not talking like body weight Jefferson curl like some people are doing, talking, properly progressing up into it. But if people build up more tolerance in those positions, into a lumbar flex position in a controlled manner, will that help during something like a loaded squat? Will it create a little more buffer resiliency around that? I don't know if there's a proven answer to that, but anecdotally, I think there's something to it.
Absolutely. I mean, I definitely agree with that. Even like loading capacities of tissues, right? That's something that we try to train in rehab essentially, or train in training. So I definitely agree with that. I think just that specific movement for me at this point just makes me nervous. Now you could ask me 5 months from now and, I could be totally change my mind. I'm definitely open to learning everything that I can and, adjusting the way that I think.
Yeah.
So maybe Jefferson curls are in the game plan tomorrow.
Load them up. No. But I don't think Jefferson curls they're not a magic exercise by any means, but I think avoiding lumbar flexion in this example, avoiding any movement sets us up for if we have to perform that movement at some time, whether that's bailing under a squat, whether that's can't control and you end up dipping too low. You could be controlling your depth, but what happens when the weight's a little too heavy, or something happens where you dip under it, or you're lifting a couch or something that doesn't allow you to get into a good position. I think some of those things, and not necessarily Jefferson curl, but finding some way to get people into lumbar flexion in this example, or whatever movement they're avoiding, there's some benefit to that.
Absolutely. I mean, even I think there was a video on Instagram going around too, and it was making fun of like PTs and trainers and stuff, how we always hammer home, like, keep your back straight. And like, he's just so rigid coming to bed. Like, it's funny. So I totally get it. It's not things that we can avoid. You can't always do things with quote unquote perfect posture. So I absolutely agree with you there.
If you're looking for the video, it's at Beard the Best You Can Be. It was the original posting of it, and it's absolutely hilarious if anyone hasn't seen it yet. Yeah, and you were talking about modifications with some of the movements in terms of adjusting depth, but I also think we were talking from building resiliency in that. Do you use any like deficit type training or anything like that to build an increased tolerance going through 110% of range of motion for, like, say, a deficit deadlift or something like that?
I personally haven't. I think the only way I've done it was for a different thought process, in the sense of doing like a stiff-legged deadlift. I have stood on some plates, but really that's just because my arms are longer and, the plates are long. So I was just trying to get more range out of it. It wasn't necessarily to work through 110%. It was for me to try to get 10%, because just based on my anatomy, I'm only going to 90.
Yeah. So using some of that though, but yeah, I think there's definitely benefit to those things. Some that I don't utilize enough either, but some of that increased, increased range of motion can, back to that same thing, at least create a little more buffer when those situations arise.
Absolutely. I think another one I've used too is like the standing on some plates with squatting. So kind of holding a dumbbell, squatting down, getting a little bit lower. But that would be the only two examples that I've used it so far.
Yeah. And I think, I think that, like I said, something I should utilize probably more than I do. I always see good benefit when I throw it in there, but something that I don't necessarily stick on as much as I should.
Sure.
A couple more questions I had for you. Where's bodybuilding fit into your current routine? Because I know that was a big part of your life for a while. Is that as a PT new mindset? Is that still get mixed in there? Is it a...
Well, I'll throw in my arm day, but at this point, it's definitely a more PT mindset when it comes to my training, and really just because of things that I've learned. I've just kind of adjusted over time, even reading research. So like being a natural athlete, that bodybuilding split might not be the best option for you, right? So training frequency is going to kind of stimulate muscle protein synthesis more often. So let's say you hit your chest 2 to 3 times a week, kind of decrease those sets. So don't do 6 to 8 to 9 sets, whatever you're doing, kind of take it down to, or actually it'd be more than that. It'll be like 12 to 15 sets of different exercises, kind of bring it down to that 6 to 8, and then get that stimulus on Monday, maybe train chest again, Wednesday, Thursday, whenever you've recovered. But then do different movements. I think for the longest time for the bodybuilding stuff, I was just doing the same thing over and over, same planes of movement. And I was just like, man, like, why do my shoulders hurt? Why do my elbows hurt? Why do my knees hurt? And it's just because I continually was just training the same movements. So now I've kind of transitioned over, decreasing sets, increased frequency of training body parts, and then now adding in stuff we talked about earlier, but, banded work, mobility work, moving with a purpose as opposed to just trying to get a nice body through weightlifting.
For sure. I just think it's such an interesting topic, and there's a couple other people. Yeah, I was curious to hear your thoughts. A couple other people I want to get on at some point, because I got far away from the bodybuilding, and I did too much, like you said, bodybuilding for an athletic standpoint. I fell too much into that of training for football. Was doing chest try, back by, that type of shoulder leg, that type of split, and I got strong in the weight room and looked like I lifted a lot, but it didn't necessarily translate to the field. But in terms of a rehab standpoint, that was another thing that I demonized for a while of, bodybuilding is not functional and this and that. But
sure,
I swung one end of the pendulum, and I'm not all the way pro bodybuilding, but I think there is a lot to bodybuilding and isolation movements, especially as it relates to some of the functional fitness, the rise of CrossFit and things like that. I think it's actually an underutilized thing, and that's why I was curious if you've seen any practical applications for it in the people you're working with.
I still do it. I shouldn't act like I'm not doing any bodybuilding movements. I still do that stuff. I think now, though, I've switched to more, instead of just doing, barbell work, I'll start doing single leg presses or single leg presses from the floor, like a chest press from the floor. Really, to be honest with you, I'm all for people exercising in any way that they can exercise. So not even just bodybuilding. Like, if you can just go out for a walk, really. If someone wants to come to me and just says, hey, like, I want to learn how to just weight train or just do bodybuilding, then that's great. Then I will work on that with them. I'm not going to, push other things that they might not want to do.
For sure. Yeah. And I think matching the exercise to, if someone doesn't want to touch weights, there's ways to stay in shape and to stay healthy without having to touch weights, and vice versa. If people only want to touch weights, there's, ways to work that in too. But, getting outside of the typical split and getting, them exposed to a little more of those functional, if you will, type patterns that they're doing. Some of the stuff I've seen, though, too, working with a lot of CrossFit athletes, though, and some of these different populations, I'm starting to think there is just some missing piece because everything's so, functional, so compound movements of doing a bunch of cleans and presses and snatches and all these things, but there's very little like horizontal rowing. There's very little, of this more what I call functional bodybuilding type stuff of having people, training some of those isolation movements can clear up a lot of shoulder issues and other things that I've seen.
Sure. Are you, if you don't mind me asking, are you finding that these guys are having performance benefits with training that way too?
Yeah, big time. I mean, especially when you look at something, I'll use the horizontal row in CrossFit example, because I think that's one of the most prevalent things. If you think about CrossFit is all vertical pressing, vertical pulling, and horizontal pressing, push-ups, burpees, but very little aside from the rower, which isn't exactly a strength movement and isn't programmed in a lot. There's very little horizontal pulling. So getting people, into some, just training the row helps people's pull-ups, helps their grip strength, helps them keep a stronger upper back position in the deadlift, helps them, so from a performance standpoint, I absolutely think there's benefit with that as well as their shoulders tend to feel better. They can get their scap in a better position, all those whole longevity things that come with it too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really sounds like too that you try to address staying out of or even introducing new patterns, because even CrossFit's great, but again, it's the same movement patterns over and over depending on the workout, right? I know they try to program different stuff in, but it seems like you're even noticing, okay, you're having a difficult time performing a horizontal row. And where's that in with the programming of CrossFit? And if it isn't in there, then let's address it.
Yeah, and just like using that to fill in the gaps. Not that isolation training should be the main thing necessarily, but I think it can fill in gaps on some of these things. And I look at exercises that I've been loving on more recently of things like a dumbbell pullover, which commonly seen as a bro lat chest exercise, but also great for thoracic mobility and lat mobility when you do it controlled and get a weight overhead like that. And that relates, keeping it on the CrossFit example, that relates to controlling your shoulder into things like kipping pull-ups and, some of that more overhead position.
That's great.
Yeah. So I don't want to keep you here too much longer. What is one of the biggest problems you're seeing in, the population you work with, whether that's general population or athletes with their training, and what do you think they would benefit from changing in that sense?
It's a loaded question.
All right, throwing it on you.
One thing that I really try to address is mobility work in itself. Just working on some thoracic rotation, thoracic extensions. And it's not only doing it, but it's finding priority in doing it, right? Because they can do it with you when you work on it, because you kind of make them do it. What I really try to hammer home is the why behind what you're doing, and not just because your coach or your doctor or whoever told you to do it, right? It's understanding the reasoning behind it, because I've found that if people truly understand why they're doing what they're doing and how it's going to benefit them, then they're going to continue to do that. And you're going to find compliance with it, and they find importance in it that way. So I wouldn't say there's any like certain specific movements. I just really try to say, okay, here's what we're doing. Here's why we're doing it. Here's how it fits your goals, how it fits your life. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I love it. Well, cool. Hey, I appreciate you taking time. I know you, it's a little later over by you than it is by me, but
okay.
Where, a good place for people to find you. I'll tag your Instagram page in here. Is that a good place for people to reach out and message you if they have questions?
Absolutely. I'm just on Instagram. I don't have any other forms of social media. So Instagram would be it.
If you're going to pick one, IG is the way to go.
That's right. I've never had a Twitter. I don't understand how Twitter works. I have Facebook at the moment, but I'm getting rid of it. I'm in a mentorship group, so I'm using Facebook for that, but then that's gone too.
hey, Instagram's the way to go. We all know that because we're on here. So,
That's right.
any parting thoughts or wisdom before we take off here?
Yeah, keep moving. Don't stop moving. Keep exercising. Prioritize exercise. Prioritize movement. You know, even if you don't want to do it, right? Like, if you get up and you don't want to exercise, just do it anyway. You'll thank yourself afterwards.
I love it. And especially that, in wrapping up what you said earlier too, that ties in good of exercise has some bad thoughts around it, but exercise can mean a lot of things. It can mean taking a walk. It can mean doing some body weight stuff. It could be, you know, tailored to you.
Absolutely.
Well, cool, buddy. Appreciate you getting on. Always good, good chatting, even if just use it as an excuse to catch up to people that I like to chat with anyways.
Thank you, Dave. The new gym looks great, by the way, or the new clinic.
I appreciate it. It's coming together.
I love it.
I'm like 90+% there. Just a couple little tweaks at this point, but I got all my toys at the ready.
That's exciting.
Yeah, you just gotta come out and check it out in person.
Absolutely. I wouldn't mind, Chicago winter versus California.
Yeah. Said there's a spot for you out here. Just I don't think I need to do too much arm twisting to get people out here.
No, I think San Diego. You're doing all right out there.
Yeah. It's a sell on its own.
Mm-hmm.
All right, buddy. We'll talk soon. I appreciate you on again.
Perfect.
I'll tag you.
Absolutely.
So for anyone that's watching after the fact, it'll be up on the story for 24 hours, I think, and then I'll throw it up on my YouTube channel as well.
Cool.
All right, Zach.
Awesome.